When we look back at the Middle Ages, it's easy to see it as a time of chaos, discomfort, and hardship, especially compared to the conveniences of our modern lives. And while that's true in many ways, some of the foundations of today's professions were actually laid during that era. One such profession is baking. Bread was an everyday necessity in medieval life, making bakers vital members of the community. But being a baker wasn't just about crafting loaves, it meant operating under strict regulations. Bakers were part of guilds that kept a close eye on their practices, and failure to meet the standards wasn't taken lightly. Fines, public humiliation, and even the destruction of a baker's oven were all possible penalties. Food scarcity made bread a survival essential during the Middle Ages. Most families depended on it as their main source of nourishment. For bakers, this meant their role was not only valued, but also tightly controlled by the authorities. In 1267, England passed the Assize of Bread and Ale, a law designed to regulate bread and beer, both in terms of cost, weight, and quality. This law wasn't just about catching thieves or dishonest sellers. Bakers could be punished simply for selling underweight bread or tampering with ingredients. Some, for instance, tried to cheat the system by adding sand to flour or inserting iron rods into loaves to meet weight expectations. Those caught could be fined, lose their right to bake, or face public disgrace. One famous punishment involved dragging a baker through the streets with their faulty loaf tied around their neck. During this period, trades like baking were overseen by guilds, organized groups that set standards and ensured quality. These guilds emerged to maintain order and structure in a time of instability. By the 14th century, the Bakers' Guild in England had split into two divisions: the white bakers, who produced refined white bread, and the brown bakers, whose loaves were more wholesome and nutritious. In 1645, these two factions united, and a few decades later, in 1686, they received a new charter that still defines their organization to this day. The ovens used back then were massive, enclosed, and fueled by wood fires. Because of their size and cost, they were often shared by entire communities. These ovens were usually placed in separate buildings, sometimes even outside city limits, to lower the risk of fire. Bakers used long-handled wooden paddles to place and remove bread from the hot ovens. Precision and timing were crucial, as was maintenance. An unattended oven could burn down a neighborhood. A baker's workday began long before dawn. The labor-intensive nature of the job, combined with limited technology, made early starts essential. Many bakers lived right above or beside their bakehouses to be closer to their work. They began by gathering firewood and preparing ingredients. Some kneaded the dough themselves, others received shaped loaves from local women, especially in smaller towns or villages. Unless a baker held a high social rank, they wore simple clothes while working. Those of a better class might wear hats or aprons, but otherwise, attire was basic and practical. Despite having access to bread, bakers didn't eat more lavishly than others of their class. Their diet matched their economic position, and bread was often their main meal too. Bread was the cornerstone of the medieval diet, and bakers used whatever grains were accessible. Since commercial yeast wasn't yet in use, brewer's yeast or fermented ale often acted as the leavening agent. Common grains included oats, millet, buckwheat, barley, rye, and wheat. White bread, made from wheat, was considered superior, but was not available in all regions due to soil conditions. It was lighter and finer, but also more expensive and reserved for wealthier classes. Bakers crafted a variety of products depending on what ingredients and seasonal goods were available. Over time, baked offerings diversified. Here are some of our most common items. 1. White bread, similar to modern white bread, using beer as the rising agent. 2. Rye bread, dense, dark, and crusty. 3. Barley bread, coarse and hearty like rye, but made from barley. 4. Unleavened bread, made without any rising agent. 5. Mixed grain bread, a blend of different flours and grains. 6. Biscuits, baked twice until completely dry and hard. 7. Cakes, much heavier and denser than today's versions. Mince pies, made with breadcrumb crust and filled with meats like beef or mutton. Desserts, on the other hand, weren't usually baked. Most sweet treats were cooked or prepared in ways that didn't require an oven, often handled by household cooks instead of bakers. Bread wasn't just food, it had deep symbolic value, especially in Christian traditions. In the Eucharist, bread represents the body of Christ, but disagreements over what type of bread should be used created significant tensions between Christian denominations. The Eastern churches believed only leavened bread, which rises, should be used, viewing it as a symbol of life and spiritual elevation. Roman Catholic churches used unleavened bread, shaped into wafers, and some saw this as a representation of suffering or death. This disagreement was not trivial. It sometimes led to accusations of heresy and even violence. In one particularly extreme act, when Catholic churches were closed, the wafers were thrown into the streets and stomped on as a protest against the Roman Rite. As with most things in the Middle Ages, access to quality bread depended on social status. Society was split into three broad classes: the upper class, nobility, monarchs, knights, and clergy; the middle class, merchants, professionals, minor clergy; and the lower class, peasants, laborers, and serfs. Upper-class citizens had access to the finest flour and baked delicacies like pies and sweet cakes. Middle-class families ate decent quality bread, often made from rye or blended grains, and could afford meat fillings for pies. Lower-class people, including peasants and farm workers, ate the hardest and coarsest breads, typically barley or rough mixed grains. The Middle Ages lasted roughly from the 5th century to the end of the 15th century. This historical period mostly refers to Europe, the United Kingdom, and parts of the Middle East. Regions like the Americas didn't experience a medieval period in the same way and are generally excluded from this framework. Life as a baker in medieval times was anything but simple. It was a physically demanding job with strict rules, harsh punishments, and social limitations. Yet these bakers played a critical role in keeping society nourished. Thanks to them and the evolution of their craft, we've inherited not only delicious traditions, but also foundational knowledge in food production, safety, and culinary art. In an age without supermarkets, electric ovens, or food regulations as we know them, medieval bakers laid the groundwork for one of the world's most enduring and essential trades. Today, every loaf on our table carries a bit of that legacy.